Tracy has a BSc Honours in Actuarial Science and an MSc in Financial Maths. She manages 10x's product development as well as its existing investment and risk products. Prior to joining 10x, Tracy worked at Investec Asset Management in market risk and quantitative analysis. Tracy graduated with distinction, making the UCT Dean's Merit List for 3 consecutive years. Please welcome to the stage, Tracy Jensen.
But can she speak English?
Yes. Okay, hi. So I do all the boring math stuff at 10x, which I find really interesting, so I don't know what that says about me. Just to answer the questions quickly about VAT, the fees do typically, you need to include VAT. VAT is levied, except for in the case of life insurance companies because it's run via a life license, so there isn't VAT. And then just one other thing, if you are interested in the calculator, you're welcome to come get it from us. Just, let us know. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing with you a bit about my experience and the research relating to default retirement options. As we know, National Treasury is making it a requirement to have a default. So it's really important that we understand the implications of that default for members. So hopefully, we don't want our members to look a bit worse for wear 10 years after they've left our corporate scheme, when they're left to their own devices. So as we know, the reason for the default is that they're used to having a structure and being looked after, and suddenly they go out on their own and they've got to find their own way when they've never had to deal with all these things. So the default hopefully is going to go a long way to helping with that. So I'm going to discuss more or less 3 things. The first, we're going to compare guaranteed annuity to a living annuity, and we're actually going to see, well, how do they compare as a default? When is one optimal, when is the other one optimal? And secondly, we're going to be looking at the rule of thumb is normally in a living annuity that you draw down 5% if you want to be safe. So you're going to take a look at that. And in regards to that, we're also going to look at the impact that fees and volatility is going to have on that. And then finally, we're going to end off with comparing what sort of tools should we be giving members so that they can assess the options for themselves. So to begin with, we can't compare anything without knowing where we're headed, what's our goal. So it's all about our goal. So I think for most members, their goal is they think they're going to be on a beach, relaxing in a hammock or sailing somewhere on a yacht. But in reality, there's really 2 important things that we need to take note of. And that is really that they want an income, so say 10,000 Rand a month, and they need that for a certain time period. So let's say 20 years or however long they think the time period is going to be. As we know, we don't always know that in advance, but that's more or less what the goal is. So in essence, there's really 2 options, since provident funds are now going to be required to annuitize at least 2/3 as well. And that's pretty much a guaranteed annuity and living annuity. And I think this is how people feel. So, do I go that? Do I go there? So, but a lot of confusion around what decisions to make. So one of the things we also need to consider is that in a guaranteed annuity, if that is our default and members have not engaged and we put them into that default, there's nothing you can do about it. Once they're in that, they can't get out of it once you've bought a guaranteed annuity. So it is one of the important things we need to consider. So there's really 5 things that are important for members, the main 5 things. There's lots of other things, but that's affordability. So people always want more now. We'll worry about later. So it's debatable whether that's good or bad, but nonetheless, that is one of the things they think about. Then secondly, inflation's really important. So at the current rates of inflation, the value of your money is going to halve in about 13 years. So we really need to think about what guaranteed annuity is appropriate. If we're not offering some sort of annuity that's increasing over time, whether it's inflation linked or not, we have to really understand our membership profile and say, well, is that really applicable if that money is going to effectively halve in 13 years? Then thirdly, longevity is becoming more and more important. People are living for longer and longer, so people need that income while they're alive, preferably for the full period while they're alive. Then flexibility is another important factor. So while you're young and you can travel, you maybe want a bit more money, but then as you get older, you're happy not to travel as much. So it's nice having the flexibility around having more income now and maybe reducing that later. And then finally, an estate. So although most people don't have enough money to start with, it's still an important consideration. They don't want to hand over their capital lump sum at the end to an insurance company often. So I'm going to show you quickly, this is for inflation-linked annuity, so on the guaranteed side, and that really meets the two of the 5 criteria. So it's providing you inflation protection, and it's guaranteed to last for life. Then on the other hand, the living annuity provides the other 3, so the exact opposite 3. So it gives you flexibility. You've got a potential to have an estate if you manage your money well, and you've got flexibility around what starting income to have. So in essence, we're going to compare a framework for these 3 things. As Stephen mentioned, there's essentially 3 portfolios: low equity, medium equity, and high equity. Although all the people marketing out there will tell you why their fund is so special, why their fund is so different. In essence, the returns are fairly similar within the 3. And we're going to be looking at 2 different fee scenarios. We're going to be looking at 1%. So all the 10x fees are below 1%. We don't have a living annuity yet, but we're hoping to launch one before the end of this year, which we're very excited about. Because to our knowledge, there isn't any low-cost living annuity products at the moment, and you'll see why we're so excited, because the impact it has on members is dramatic. And then how we get to the 3% is typically in a living annuity, you have about a 1% fee for advice, up to 1%, up to about 0.5% as your platform fee, and then about 1.5% as investment management, because typically the investments are unit trust investments. So we're going to look exactly which annuity is best. So to do that, we're going to begin by setting our incomes equal. So we can go out into the market, we can get an inflation-linked annuity rate. So we know what that is. We're going to set our living annuity income equal to that, and we're going to increase that each year with inflation until we hit that cap of 17.5%, and that's when we're going to call that's the end of our term. Although you will have some money left, but we're going to say that's when your income is now going to drop in real terms, so inflation adjusted. And then, as I said, the second part of your goal is your term. How long do you want your money to last for? So the assumptions are, you're assuming somebody's retiring at age 65. And then in terms of setting the actual incomes, if you go into the market, this is just for a single life because it's easier for comparison's sake. If you actually did this for your fund, you could obviously look at a joint life annuity. But this is just for single life. So males are going to get about 6.5%. Sorry, woman, all the money you saved on your lower life insurance premiums are now coming back in retirement. You're only going to get 5.6%. So if you had R1 million, as a male, you could get about 65,000 Rand in income a year, and as a female, 56,000. And then you'll see the life expectancy is the reason for that, that males live for about 17 years from age 65, and women for 21, so they live about 4 more years. So what we did here is we're starting out with males. This is your 1% fee scenario. So I said, in the 3 portfolios, low equity, medium equity, and high equity, that dark blue band there, the 14, the 15, and the 20, is on average how long that money is going to last in your living annuity before it drops. So here we're drawing down 6.5%, as I said, for males. And if we compare that to what our life expectancy is, of 17 years, you can see the low equity and medium equity is not even going to get you there on average. So you've got to seriously consider whether that's appropriate if it's not even getting you to your life expectancy on average. High equity, you can see it is just above the 17 years, but you can see it's quite a big range of outcomes that you could have had. The other interesting thing to note is that if you look in terms of downside risk there, that high equity actually has more years than low equity. So you've got to ask yourself, what is more risky? How do you define risk? If you're defining risk as volatility, high equity is going to be more risky. But what is your risk really? Your risk should be set in relation to your goal. So your risk is that you're not going to meet your goal. So in that context, high equity is less risky than low equity. So it's quite a reversal to what we're used to being told. Then if we look at our 3% fee scenario, you see how dramatic it is. Shrinks and drops. So it's not too good. You can see suddenly that 20 years has dropped by 6 years. So if you want to ask yourself, what do my fees cost me? That 2% extra in fees cost you 6 years of income that you've now paid that income over to somebody else instead. And if you compare that to your 17 years life expectancy, no portfolio would have even got you there on average. So if you look at the current situation where most of the fees are 3%, is a living annuity appropriate as a default relative to a guaranteed annuity? The answer is no, because on average it's worse. So I've put up So I don't know why the things are lining up funny on here. They were fine on the presentation. If you look at high equity is the only one that's given you more than a 50% chance of doing better than a guaranteed annuity. If you look at your high fee scenario, the best you've ever got there is 1/3 chance of getting there. So there's only one option if you are going to consider using a living annuity for males. Now we're going to go look at females, and the case here is a bit different because remember they're drawing down a slightly lower amount than males. So you can see here that 20 years for males in high equity is now 30. So it has quite a big impact changing your drawdown just by about 1%. And again, if we compare to the life expectancy, now we're living a bit longer, so we need the money for longer. It's 21 years here. Now both medium and high equity would have got you there more than 50% of the time. So it's quite interesting. There isn't ever much debate around default options around gender, but gender actually does play quite an important role in setting what defaults are appropriate. Again, if we change the fees to 3%, that 30 years is 18 years. So here it's cost you 12 years of income, which is massive. If you put in your life expectancy again, no portfolio would have got you there on average. So it really has a dramatic impact on where you're going to be, which is why I'm so excited about this, because of the impact it's actually going to have on people's lives. So if we look at our probabilities of getting there, now a high equity's got a 65% chance of being better than a guaranteed annuity. So now you really have to start thinking and weighing up the benefits versus the disadvantages of that as a default option. And then 3% fees, nothing would have got you there. So you can see in this case there's two options as a female. It's either medium equity or high equity. So in summary, when is a living annuity better? We got our two fee scenarios. So you got males only in high equity, females in medium or high equity. But if you got 3% fees, forget about it. It's not going to work as a default. So there's three things we can really learn from this. Low fees plus high equity is optimal. So Stephen spoke a bit about an optimal portfolio pre-retirement. And an optimal portfolio post-retirement is what is going to give you the highest probability of meeting your goal with the least risk. And that's high equity, which I know is counterintuitive, but that's what the results show. Then living annuities are better generally for females than males, which is again something that's not often spoken about. And finally, high fees ruin your retirement. I forgot to mention earlier that those returns I was showing you, they're also long-run returns. They're since 1900. And as I said, in the living annuity, we've actually increased the income with inflation each year until you hit your cap, which is those years that were recorded on the diagram. So secondly, we're going to look at the rule of thumb of 5%. So often it's thrown around 5% as an appropriate drawdown rate. You shouldn't be drawing down anything more than that. But what we're going to look at again is the typical industry projections, and then we're actually going to put in fees, and we're going to put in volatility, and we're going to see what the impact on the projections is. So typically, there's no fees, and there's no volatility. So what do they look like? They look something like that. Looks great. My money's going to last for 50 years. Go on that holiday, buy that yacht. Things are great. High equity is a bit too risky for me, so yeah, medium equity still looks good. It's going to last me a long time, so it all looks great. Typically what they do is they give you a table. You pick your return. Don't ask me how people are supposed to know what their return is, and that's including inflation. So now you're going to be an economist as well and work out what inflation is going to be in that. So it's really not helpful to people. And then you get something out like this, which is completely misleading. So let's add in our 3% fee. Well, the picture doesn't look so great anymore. I mean, the drop there is between 11 years and, 38 years. So it's really a massive drop. But now, what about volatility? So we know that returns aren't level. They kind of go like this. We're going to get there, same points, but what happens if it is volatile? Again, suddenly our 50 years is halved. All I've done is add in volatility and fees. Now, this is only on average. So on average, so you've got a 50-50 shot of getting to that 25 years in the high equity. But what happens if it's not okay to just say to your members, well, sorry, you weren't in one of that 50%. Tough luck for you. I gave you a 50-50 shot. What happens if you actually want a higher level of confidence? So let's say you want to be 80% confident that you're going to get there. So if you take all historic scenarios since 1900 and you want to know that only 20% of the time would you have been worse off, what does that leave you? 14 years. So you've gone from 50 years to 14 years. So when your financial advisor or whoever, you see the nice product brochure and it's saying 50 years, well, your 50 years is not 50 years. So that can lead to mis-selling because 1% in fees every year is a lot better as an advisor than getting 1% once off at the start of my guaranteed annuity. So you really need to make sure that the projections you're using to make decisions account for these three things. So the last thing we're going to talk about is a bit around tools and what tools are appropriate for members. We're actually busy developing these to be put on our website. So please, if you have any feedback on what you think worked in this, if you think there's something else that should be done differently, then please be welcome to hear that feedback. It would be great for us to change it if you think there's something that we can do better. So again, it's about what is your goal. We've used a 5% drawdown again. And this is important because this is pre-fees. So if your fees are 3% and your drawdown is 5, your drawdown is actually 8%, not 5. So you need to actually put fees in. If your fees are 1% and your drawdown is 5, then your drawdown is 6%. So if you're using the rule of thumb as 5 and you really want to keep it at 5, including fees, what does that mean? You take 2%, your providers, and everyone else takes 3. So they're getting more income from your money than you are, which is not ideal. So here I've used a longer term just to see what the impact is, because if we plan for life expectancy, not everyone's going to hit life expectancy. Some people are going to live longer, some people are going to live shorter. So I've used a slightly longer term here. So what that shows is I've got the two fee scenarios again, 1% and 3%. So as I was saying, you need to give members something. If I continue on this path, what's going to happen? What is the probability of me being successful? Where successful means I'm going to draw 5% every year. Whatever that initial amount is, I'm going to increase with inflation, and that needs to carry on for 25 years before my income drops in real terms after inflation. So you've got a 1/3 chance of getting there in a low equity portfolio with low fees. High fees, basically call it 0. Forget about it. It's not going to happen. So again, low equity is not low risk. What happens if we look at something more like a medium equity portfolio? Now things are looking better. You've got a 60% shot of getting there. But again, in your high fee scenario, you've only got about a 1/3 chance of getting there. So lastly, if we look at high equity, now things are looking reasonable, 75% shot. 3 out of 4 scenarios you would have got there. So that's looking more plausible as an actual option. Whereas if you look at the high fee scenario, you've still only got a 50-50 shot. So the only 2 cases that have given you more than a 50-50 shot of getting there is your low fees and medium or high equity. So again, the different ways of looking at things, the same results are coming out every time. So what maximizes the probability of meeting your goal? As I've showed you through all the different examples, it's high equity plus low fees gives you the greatest shot of actually getting there. So to summarize the things I've spoken about, it's what is an optimal default if we compare living annuity to guaranteed annuity? Well, for males, it's high equity and low fees. For women, it's either high or medium equity with low fees. But, sorry, we'll get there. But high fees, as I said, during your retirement, no scenario would have got you there if your fees were 3%. So the second thing we looked at is things are not always what they seem. Suddenly our 50 years is 14 years. So make sure when you're looking at projections, and if these are the tools you're giving your members, your projections must include at least fees and volatility. Confidence, you can decide whether you're happy to, I don't know how many people disclose confidence, but at least fees and volatility because the impact is massive. And then the last thing we spoke about is, are your tools that you're giving members actually helping them or hindering them? Are they like those projections I showed you? Or are they going to actually tell them, if I continue on this path, where am I going to end up? What is the chance of me actually being successful in what I'm trying to achieve? So here we saw medium equity or high equity with a 1% fee is what's going to get you there. So thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Just a quick game. Honesty is the best policy in this game. Who here is invested at all in index funds? Okay. Who here has got more than 50% of their investments in index funds? That is so small. How much trouble is this room in?
A lot.
Extrapolate.
Well, the results I showed you was only for retirement. If you actually integrate pre and post retirement with high fees, I know it sounds implausible, but your chance of getting there is zero, basically. Literally, it comes out at zero.
No, you said so much trouble. Well, we're in trouble. We're in trouble.
So hopefully our next conference we'll integrate the two, and then we can really show you what happens.
Exactly right. Now, given that all draws from an RA are 100% taxable, what fee should one stop contributing to an RA? When? Thank you. It's supposed to keeps calling me David Whitfield. My brother is David. I'll make sure he gets the note. He'll go, what? I'm a farmer. When?
Okay, so when?
So, assuming,
again?
okay, given that all drawdowns from RAs are 100% taxable, when should we stop contributing to an RA?
So I'm not sure I'm following the question. Are
me.
they saying they're actually,
David
you're
over
planning on withdrawing before you retire?
At a point in time, say 2 years before retirement, does it pay to put your money into an RA to get your 15% deduction deducted for tax purposes when the next year you start drawing? And that's 100% taxable. So you only get, say, a 65%
Okay, so you,
35% tax benefit in year one, and it could be taxed at 40% in year two.
but that's going to change now when they bring in the way they're changing RAs and they're integrating all the products, pension, providence, because they're going to look at your total remuneration in terms of tax deductibility. So then it will be treated the same way as your pension and your providence and all of your other funds. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not following what you...
You're not having any lunch today.
Sorry.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, 2 questions, 2 bossy questions. Right, one at a time, please. No fighting over the microphone. First question.
Sorry, just a quick one. 10X is a big advocate of the life stage model, so as you come closer to retirement, they move you into a lower equity model. Yet now you've just advocated to say in a life stage model you need to look at medium to high equity. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, when we launch the living annuity, we're going to allow opt-out because it doesn't make sense, as you're saying, 10 years, say, prior to, if you're going into a living annuity, it doesn't make sense to de-risk, to re-risk again. So we are going to offer opt-out. The reality is that we're trying to deal with is that members usually don't know what they want to do until a few years prior to retirement. So we're planning on actually communicating with members, like Dave was saying, engaging them earlier, kind of entering into discussions about what they want to do and going through, okay, not to this level of complexity, but going through these types of things to help them think about these things before they, a year or two from retirement. So it's very valid.
Can you pass the microphone on? Same question.
Okay.
Hey, they're cloned. Any other questions? Any other questions? Any other questions? Any other questions? Tracy, you're free to go. Stephen, Nathan, I want you back up here, please.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy.